Okay, just so people will stop asking, the reason I haven't reviewed Dune yet is because it's not out in the United States yet, and there hasn't been a screening yet that's been fully conducive to the rest of my schedule. Yeah, I could rearrange a lot of work and bend over backwards to fit it in, but I'm not going to because frankly I resent this whole mounting notion that I'm supposed to treat fucking Dune as some separate and special singular cinema apart from the rest of the blockbuster slate because Warner Brothers let Denis Villeneuve sit in the director's chair and crank the saturation knob down to important movie gray tone. I mean, before they dumped it to max with the rest of their slate. No, it can get in line with everything else, and just so we're clear, yeah, Villeneuve is easily one of the best raw director talents working today, and he's earned some of his clearly very high opinion of himself, but slow your roll, David Frenchier. You're damn good, but just because you also managed a good sequel out of Ridley Scott's Leftovers doesn't make you James Cameron yet. Anyway, speaking of Ridley Scott and directors who don't always make great movies, but when they do, they tend to be really great, Sir Ridley has 2 movies out this season, and the first up is The Last Duel. A true history meets true crime meets what is truth really medieval drama in the ye good old days were not actually all that good mold that feeds the incidental details of the last recorded instance of trial by combat as means of settling an official matter under law in the age of knights in France through the RASHOMON plot structure wherein the facts of the case are related 3 times over from conflicting and also not conflicting perspectives of key figures involved.
You like RASHOMON?
That's not how I remember it.
Before getting to the final battle to the death wherein 2 of those involved will in fact try to kill each other under the pretext that God won't allow a liar to have prevailed. The year is 1386, our setting is medieval France, and the facts of the case are that Matt Damon's newly knighted squire and modestly successful landed noble Jean de Carouge is informed upon returning from business that his wife Marguerite, Jodie Comer, who's having a hell of a year between this and Free Guy, that during his absence she has been attacked and violently raped by his former friend Adam Driver as Jacques Legris. Though still only a squire himself, Legris is a favorite friend of the region's chief legal authority, Ben Affleck's Count Pierre d'Alencon, and thus stands no chance of being found guilty or even properly investigated for the charges, so de Carouge encourages his house and associates to spread a whisper campaign of the allegations all the way up to the ears of King Charles, to whom he ultimately petitions for trial not by the court but by combat, by that point a relic of the Dark Ages, but which he happens to know is still technically on the books under French law if so granted by the king, who, since this is the guy history remembers as Charles the Mad, pretty much decides, wait, I can do that? Fuck yeah, let's go! Dimanche, dimanche, dimanche! Am I right? So, I don't actually know in what context spoilers should be described here, since this is actual recorded history. I mean, this is a really famous piece of history in France, especially. The duel itself was the last one because the facts of the case were so publicly in dispute for so long after that this was where they decided, okay, let's maybe not do any more law like this, huh? And the film's screenplay is based on a 2004 book by Eric Jagger, so you can just look up which one of them won, but the film's narrative treats the outcome of the duel itself as an element of tension, particularly since if de Carouge loses, Marguerite also gets burned at the stake for making a false accusation, a fact which it turns out he forgot to mention before deciding that this was the plan, so I guess we'll go with that and not touch on the ending. In any case, without getting to how it wraps up, The Last Duel in The Last Duel itself is a minor masterpiece of authentically nasty, brutal, muddy, bloody, 2 big dudes in armor fucking each other up with heavy-ass stabbing weapons, nothing graceful, nothing pretty. This is what it must have really looked like badassery you'd expect from the director of Gladiator, Kingdom of Heaven, and The Duelist. But prior to that, and apart from some well-timed cutaways to snippets of military campaigns and local skirmishes, this is pretty much more of a historical period piece and legal drama than it is an action film, in the positive sense. The subtext and regular text are all about the way courtly formalities, religious piety, and even battlefield honor codes of the era barely papered over the bloody and cutthroat, but also petty and banal day-to-day politics of survival and social mobility in the society, and since we're doing the RASHOMON thing, we get to see these points hammered home 3 times over, though in subtly different contexts. De Carouge's version is relayed first, wherein he depicts himself as a righteous, if perhaps also a little too self-righteous man of war, a decent, if often oblivious husband to a recognizably too-good-for-him wife, motivated by vengeance, pious justice, and also he just really wants to kick this guy's ass, had for a long time, because he's turned into just a total full of himself asshole who's been screwing people, and him in particular, over since he became the Count's sidekick, so hey, maybe the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? But in Legris's version, de Carouge is basically a dumb brute who was maybe useful in wartime because he's just kind of a tank with a shit ton of rich kid insecurities and daddy issues to take out on whatever you point him at, who Legris, a peasant-born youth who parlayed his math and reading skills into favor as the Count's advisor and debauchery wingman, sees himself as tolerating and trying to help despite de Carouge's penchant for filing largely baseless real estate lawsuits, and despite being France's most infamous ladies' man, he's instantly smitten with Marguerite upon recognizing she's an educated woman of languages and books like himself and just can't help himself but be overcome by the injustice that she's captive to an illiterate buffoon whom he sure only sees her as a means to sire an heir and claim land and titles. And then in Marguerite's version, which through order of telling and timing and in a fade-in out of on-screen text of the film would appear to indicate we are to accept as the true or most true of the 3, well, in her version, they both suck, basically. Actually, clearly they're both sucking their versions too. One of the nice surprises here is that where most Rashomon-alikes lean too hard on the unreliable narrator crutch in an unrealistic way, but the differing versions of Legree and de Carouge depicted here by themselves versus the objective, at least by available comparison version in Marguerite's telling, are deviously well observed in terms of what two men like this would consider worth fudging the details about, and what will surely make this a very rewatchable film, especially since this is Ridley Scott doing history, so you assume there's a director's cut waiting out there. In terms of finding new places for you to go, seriously, bro? You thought this was the version where you came off well? In any case, her version is the one that sticks chiefly to the film's apparent thesis on the matter, i.e. both of these men were bastards, but also the entire system and society that existed around them and her were a nightmare built on sexual subjugation. If only there was a word for that. And as a woman whose marriage and entire adult life has only ever existed as human property token to be bartered around by her husband, father, Legree, the court, etc., it's arguable that she or any other woman in her position in this era can't ever really be said to have consented to anything ever. As is, neither her or Legree's version of the story disagree that there was a rape. His version merely includes more of his own insistence that it doesn't really count as such because he's certain she secretly wanted him to because he's a better man than de Carouge, which in turn we're led to suspect that the court might actually have sided with as a legitimate defense, since each story is also constructed as a medieval legal facts 101 bullet point presentation relating to each character's circumstances, land and titles case law for de Carouge, how to make friends and influence people medieval style for Legree, and wow, the legal system sure was complex, awful, and stupid, especially for women in this era for Marguerite, the first two parts being compelling enough in a didn't know that, interesting, and the more things change, right, sense, respectively, and then the third coming in to wallop the audience with, oh, right, things have not haymakers where physicians insist that rape can't have occurred if there wasn't a female orgasm, and also that children can't be conceived without one, and panels of religious judges grill Comer, who's phenomenal here, about whether or not she ever said Legree was handsome, because apparently that matters, which ultimately is why, even though the film falls a bit short of masterpiece status, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just also not straining for the heights. This is an actor showcase drama programmer elevated by handsome shooting and the reliable 3 great scenes, no bad scenes rule of thumb. It plays out more interestingly than a lot of other attempts to retread the Rashomon gimmick usually do. You know, often the multi-view storytelling angle defaults to unknowability or moral ambiguity, but The Last Duel is aiming for something closer to clarity through cynicism in its nuance, and accepting that, at least in the film's narrative, evident fact that there was in fact rape committed by both the victim's perspective and the perspective of the audience in modernity, the which guy in the duel was actually right concept becomes an afterthought, even as the disputed details remain peppered throughout the margins. Along with the righteousness of the duel itself, you end up wanting things to work out for her because clearly no proper version of law is going to, which is more unexpected and compelling take than a straightforward did he or didn't he thriller or some esoteric meditation on unknowability might have been. Plus, the narrative deciding to avoid valorizing either of the male subjects leaves Damon and Driver with both meatier if also uglier roles to dive into. It's not exactly surprising at this point that Adam Driver can pull off the rakish wannabe philosopher knight who also turns on a dime to full-on medieval sleazeball gangster vibe, but it's also fun to see his intimidating physicality on display from the outset instead of the, oh, the lanky moody guy can actually fight reveal they usually give him in movies for some reason. It's weird that casting keeps forgetting or ignoring that this guy went all the way through Marine training, right? And speaking of which, Damon should be mad as hell at whoever his fit training people were for the Bourne movies, because I don't know about you, but I never once bought him as 0% body fat action guy in those, but here they've got him built up to play this burly brick shithouse medieval asshole, and he looks like a 1970s Georgia pro wrestling heel, and it's really the first time I've ever thought in a movie, holy shit, Will Hunting looks like he could just fucking destroy somebody in this, which is all the more impressive because he's still selling the hell out of de Carouge as this fundamentally whiny, pissing and moaning dickbag who even in his own I'm the hero, look how much was against me version of events comes off like this medieval Frank Grimes, where you're thinking, this guy is just determined to be such a dink about his own immiseration, you just don't care anymore. But the show actually gets stolen right out from under everyone by Ben Affleck, who was originally set up to play Legree but stepped aside for scheduling and took the smaller part, but clearly this was the better decision, effectively opting to play D'Alencon as Count Douche of Baggington, most realistic medieval movie lord ever. He gets the sole recurring character who's pretty much the same in everyone's telling because everyone, including himself, seems to get that this guy is a peacocking, unapologetic scumbag who just wants to retain exactly enough power to continue enjoy not having to pretend to not be a scumbag like everyone else is in the 1380s, along with being both the comic relief and the plot axis on which a lot of the pre-title storyline turns. But part of what makes the final film perhaps less satisfying than it might otherwise have been is that he's far and away the most entertaining performance, but the script is treating the events and subject seriously enough that it doesn't try to inflate his presence as the main villain. The cliche that the villain is patriarchy really does indeed seem to be the point here, artificially, so he's a diminished presence in the final third when it takes over to become all about centering Jodie Comer's excellent performance. You do end up missing him a bit. Not so much that you'd sacrifice the meaningful stuff, but when it's over, the first thing I was thinking after that was damn good was Affleck is an instant best supporting actor frontrunner now. To the rest of it, gnarly, provocative, solid stuff. Call this an 8 out of 10. Don't let it pass you by.